Hey everyone, Chris here and welcome to another class in our Yoga for Resilience series. So this one's a physical postures day and asana day, and today we're going to look at adaptations. So things that you might want to change so that as we go through and we make these classes a bit more advanced and we do more stuff, you'll know how to adapt them for you. Because I can give you these classes, but I also really want to empower you to kind of take control of your practice, to decide what you want to do, because ultimately you know your body way better than I do. I really don't know your body. Like, I can kind of guess if we're doing like an in-person class and I can see you, or on Zoom or whatever, but in these classes it's just me talking to a screen. So the real expert in your body, I know how an average human body might work, but all bodies are different. There's no such thing as an average. So really it's down to you to work out what is good for your body. And so in some ways it's a good responsibility, but I really want to empower you to take that control. And I want to give you permission to say, you know what, this isn't working for me. I'm going to do something else. So if we do get into a pose and it just doesn't feel good, you don't like it, then just do something else. Like, I give you that permission. You don't have to look like me. You don't have to follow everything I do. You're in control. So if we think about what kind of poses will and won't work for us and what we should do about them, well, some poses really will work for you. For example, a supine twist really works for me. We'll do plenty of that in the course because I love the pose. And so it's kind of like you're lying on your back and you let your legs fall down to one side, and I just get this really good release in my lower back when I do that. And so that's probably a cue that I should do that more because it feels great. Then you might get other poses that don't feel good, but feels like you need to do it more. So for example, a staff pose, which is a seated, going into a seated forward fold like this. I just have really tight hamstrings, really tight hip flexors. Some people are bent double here. I'm like, just sitting up straight is hard for me. And that, again, is probably a sign I should do this pose more, because it's quite challenging, but it's not hurtful. It's difficult, but it's not kind of unpleasant. So there are some poses that won't feel great, but you think, okay, I should do this more. Then there are some poses that you do and you think, actually, I just shouldn't do this. So for example, if we're in Sphinx pose, which is like this, and you're pregnant, you can probably work out that this isn't the pose for you, and that's going to be a time when you need to swap something out. And it might not be as obvious as that. It might just be that, let's say you've got an old injury, and we're say you have like a challenging ankle, and we're doing this kind of square pose where we're stacking the legs, and it just really hurts you because it's aggravating something, and you think, this isn't something I need to stretch out, this is just something that hurts. And then that's absolutely the time that you need to say, actually, this is not working for me and I'm going to do something different. So when might we need to make these adaptations? What kind of things do you need to look out for? Well, first of all, like physical limitations. So we're all different in our strength, in our flexibility. If some people can do a headstand, some people can't. Some people can do these weird twists where they tie themselves into a pretzel. For many of us, including me, I can't do that. And so that's just a physical limitation I need to be aware of. Also, acute or long-term injuries. So if we have injured something in the past and the doctor said, look, you just need to be careful with this, then that's something to bear in mind. Or maybe we've just hurt ourselves. Maybe we've been out for a run and chafed in an unpleasant place, and we just need to say, okay, well, I need to be careful of this for this class. As we talked about, pregnancy is a big thing. You probably, if you've got a baby bump, you don't want to be putting any pressure on that. And equally, it can be hard. It's not just lying on our front in Sphinx pose, but even say, let's say we're in corpse pose, so we're lying here. If you've got a big baby bump, that can be really unpleasant too. And so you might want to come up with an adaptation, and I'll show you some adaptations for that, where you're on your side more. So then there's medical conditions. So high blood pressure is a good example of this, where some high blood pressure is okay, but if your doctor has said, look, it's really serious and I want you to prop yourself up when you're in bed because I want your head above your heart. Well, if we're doing, say if we're doing supported bridge, where we're raising our hips and raising our heart up and having our head on the ground, clearly that's not going to have been a good idea based on the medical advice you've had. So again, time to swap it out for a different pose. And then also trauma. So if you look at a pose like happy baby, so we'll be down on our backs, grabbing our heels. This can be a lovely release for the lower back. But obviously, if you have any kind of trauma, like sexual trauma in your past, obviously it's going to feel awful to do that kind of pose. And similarly, like if we're doing stuff where we're closing our eyes, but you're not comfortable closing your eyes because of previous things that have happened to you, then absolutely listen to what you need. Don't feel you need to follow these instructions. Allow your body to take what it needs, and don't take the things that you don't want to do, because this course is supposed to be useful, helpful and pleasant. And if it isn't one of those things, then that's a good sign you need to make some adaptations. So what I want to do now for this class is just cover some of the core poses that you might come into, and how you could adapt them, how you could change them. And the first thing we're going to cover is just this idea of sitting, because we start and finish a lot of the classes in a seated pose. And a lot of the time we're doing this kind of cross-legged thing. So you can stack the legs if that feels more comfortable. You can do a more cross-legged, where like you've got your ankles under your shins. You can do it more like I'm doing, where they're kind of both on the floor in a kind of triangle shape. And also you can raise the hips up. So if you look, I'm actually sat on a block here. You could do the same thing with a cushion, stick that under. That can just raise your hips up a little bit, if I can get it under there. And that'll just tip them forward. So if you've got tight hips, it can be difficult to get that. But if you just tip the hips up a bit, tilts everything a bit forward, and it's just a lot easier to do this. Now, if this kind of cross-legged easy pose isn't working for you, there's plenty of other ways that you can sit. So you can do more of a staff pose, so just sat on your bottom with your legs out long. This is actually harder for me. This pose does not work for me at all. But again, you can always prop up, so grabbing something like a cushion or a blanket, or in this I'm using a yoga block, but you don't need any of these yoga blocks. Like a pillow works completely fine as well. Again, it can just help to tip you forward a little bit. So that's one option. Whenever we're sitting, you could come to this seated pose. You could also sit on your ankles. So coming back and just sitting down onto here. Now again, depends on which bits of your body are flexible. This is quite a stretch for me on the top of the foot, sitting on the ankles. But some people find it really easy to sit like this, and they find it much easier than doing any kind of cross-legged thing, which is tougher on the hips. And again, you could even stick a cushion under here and maybe put a blanket under the knees if that's too difficult. So that's another option if we're just sitting down and the cross-legged thing isn't working for you, and sitting with your legs out long isn't working for you. You can also come and sit on your heels. Now, if none of those things are working for you, then one thing you could do is just grab a chair. and just sit on the chair. Chair yoga is a whole thing. You'll be amazed at how many poses you can do while just sat on the edge of a chair. So do grab a chair if you need to. And also you could just lie down. So if you're finding that difficult, or at any time when you're just finding it really difficult, just have a lie down. Like this isn't power flow. We're not trying to be super intense. And if you do need to lie down, or you just find that easier for a lot of the exercises where we are sitting, and just especially in like the meditation and the mindfulness stuff, you can just lie down for those. So those are your seated options. Now another thing that we come through a lot is tabletop. So this is again where we're kind of on all fours, and we might be doing some cat-cow stretches here. Now, how might you want to adjust this? Well, again, if you've got old knees like mine, maybe you want to grab a blanket and you want to pull those under your knees and just give a little padding there. But also most things that we're going to do in this series of classes that you can do in tabletop, you can actually do seated. So if we're thinking about these cat-cow stretches that we're doing, and we'll do this in a couple of lessons, you can actually just do them sat down. So if you bring yourself into a seated position, you can actually do the same movement with the spine. And we'll do this in a couple of classes. I'll talk you through it. So if you are struggling with tabletop, then just come to a seated position and you can probably do the same thing. Now, so that's tabletop. Another one we'll do quite a lot is child's pose. Child's pose traditionally looks like this. So you'll send your knees out towards the edge of the mat. You'll bring the big toes together. You send the arms out long and bring the forehead down to the mat. Lovely, really well used pose in restorative yoga, but can be surprisingly intense. And there's lots of ways that we can make this easier on ourselves. So again, we can bring that blanket under our knees and give our knees a bit of padding. And then it can also be really tough to sit on the heels. So bringing a pillow, putting that there can make it a lot easier. And then maybe another pillow under the head as well. So if you're finding it difficult to get your forehead all the way down, you could bring a pillow or a block, or especially if you've got any kind of a bolster or like a big sofa cushion. So I'll actually grab one of the big cushions off the back of my sofa. Who needs to buy a bolster when you've got a sofa? Again, if you find it really difficult, or you don't want to bring your head all the way down, then just using something like this, it can prop your head up and get into that kind of child's pose while raising your head up to a more comfortable position and giving you that support. So it's often done in the yoga studio with a bolster, but I hate when these classes are like, and you need all these 10 yoga props. So as long as you've got like a sofa or a pillow or a duvet or a blanket, any of those things, just grab those and improvise. Don't go out and buy all the fancy yoga props unless you want to. You can also just replace child's pose with corpse, which are Shavasana. Shavasana we tend to talk about more because it's a nicer name than corpse. And we'll cover corpse pose now. So again, let's look at what corpse pose traditionally looks like, and then we'll break it down into things that we can do. So looks a lot like a dead body, hence the name, where we'll tend to finish a class like this, where we're just releasing all of the tension, arms down by our side. We can bring our hands to our belly as well. but just releasing all of that tension. And so there's a couple of things we can do here. One, again, we can pad. So if it's feeling too hard on our head, we could grab a pillow and put it below our head. Also a really nice time to add a blanket and cover ourselves, or I like to just cover my feet and my legs, but you might want to get fully under the blanket because it is typically the pose we use at the end of the class to really relax and unwind. So you might want to, or if you've got really tight knees, you can stick a pillow under the knees as well. Just wherever, just play around with it and see what works for you. Now, most of the time we're on our backs. Occasionally, we're going to do corpse pose on our front as well. That can be a really nice release. And again, you can put the pillow under your head. You can use your arms for a pillow. Now, again, we talked about this idea that if you're pregnant, or just if you've got stomachache or a sensitive tummy, you're probably not going to want to lie on either of those, and that's completely fine. You can you can just lie on your side for corpse pose. So again, really nice to bring a pillow there, and you can bring the legs up in a kind of 90-degree bend if that feels good. You might even want to bring giant sofa pillow or a bolster, put them between the knees. You can then use your hand as a kind of cradle for your head as well. And this is another really nice way, if the other corpse poses aren't working for you, just to allow any tension to melt away. I'll try not to fall asleep while I'm demonstrating this pose. So, to summarize there, I'll provide you options as we go along. So in each of the poses, in each of the classes, I'll try and provide you options. But at any time, we'll be using these kind of poses a lot. And if you have like a blanket and a sofa cushion, or the big stuff from behind your sofa, all of that can be super useful. And you can substitute out any of these anytime. So if you want to change the way we're sitting, if you want to change the way we're doing Shavasana, find what works for you. You can always pause the videos, or you can just let the video roll and just take your time, and don't feel pressured to kind of get into the pose straight away, because we're holding most of them for quite a while. But even if you kind of spend the whole pose trying to get comfortable, that's really valuable learning, because you'll then know for next time how that pose works for you. So time well invested if you end up doing that. So hopefully that's given you some ideas of how you can adapt each of the classes to your body's need. As I said earlier in the class, you're really the expert in your body. I know some stuff about yoga, but nobody knows your body as well as you do. And so I really want to empower you to make those changes necessary. So we've covered the introduction now, we've covered some adaptations you want to make. Next time we come into the physical postures, we're going to do a bit more of a traditional class. It will still be very slow moving. In this, we're really going to focus on holding these gentle stretches for a long time to kind of counter the frantic nature of modern life. But I can't wait to share that with you. So I can't wait to see you in the next class.